Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today it is Coach Natalie and I chatting through how to match your nutrition and training in a fat loss phase. Super important, super underrated topic. When it comes to achieving the best body composition at the end of the fat loss phase, I think that a lot of people think of your training and nutrition as almost two entirely separate entities where the way that we train shouldn't change at all, or we should completely change it and training should be like the driver for fat loss. Now they need to they work together very much. They need to be supportive of each other. And we need to make sure we're still getting the signal to build or at very least maintain muscle. But again, like what we're doing with our training to allow for that and thus have the best result at the end of the fat loss phase and our nutrition, like kind of how those work together. It's so important to just understand how to manipulate this relationship properly, kind of things we can do with both. So today we're just talking through just some examples of how we approach this with clients, different methods we can implement to really just create this synergistic relationship between your training and your nutrition to make sure that at the end of the phase, we have built or at very least maintained as much muscle as possible, but also you are your leanest. Before we get into it, Natalie, anything from you going on this week? Anything new?
Nothing new. I am on my fifth week of prep and it is going well. Thyroid's hanging on for dear life. Still moving along at a good clip, which is, of course, really motivating. Just to, like see that downward trend. We're into calorie cycling. My coach made another pull this week. Uh, we're just like cranking and keeping it moving, which I don't hate. And actually pulled a little bit from my low days and added a little bit to my high day repeat.
Okay.
Don't hate that either.
I wouldn't
Um,
either.
yeah, I've been leaning a lot on bagels on my high days, which has been like proven to be such a top tier choice. First of all, I don't have any issues with like gluten or anything like that. So that's not a concern, but I find that bagels have been just really fun because I don't have to like buy a loaf of bread because I wouldn't use it. I'm not really
Yeah.
eating bread currently in my diet right now. I'm being a little bit more strategic with my carb choices, like more potato, butternut squash, things like that. And so I don't need like a whole package of English muffins hanging around for me to have like one high day, one or two high days a week, because I would just
Hmm.
move through them. So bagels have been nice because you kind of
So
can.
like one-off bagels we're talking.
Exactly. And then I
Oh,
also kind of
nice.
like the weather's been so wonderful and like warm. So I've kind of been working that into my steps. It's like, oh, well, like I'll go for a walk to the bagel shop and get a bagel for my refeed tomorrow.
That
So
sounds delightful,
it
honestly.
actually really has
That
been.
does sound really
So
nice.
I've kind of been enjoying that and I kind of you don't want to get into too much of a routine in prep because as soon as
Yeah.
you get into a routine, there's going to be some sort of like curveball or change or something. But I've just been doing my refeeds very like they pretty much look the same every time they come up. It's like, yep, so we'll add like half a bagel to breakfast with some jam, half with lunch. And it's been very strange too. Like hunger's been very manageable. I energy is fine, training's fine, so it's been really interesting because like the first couple weeks I was really sick, so I couldn't taste any of my food. So it honestly just didn't matter much at all. And now that I've kind of regained my sense of taste, it's just been interesting that like my high day, I just had one Tuesday. It's now Thursday as we record. And like it just kind of was what it was. It like wasn't a big event at all. Like I didn't necessarily really mentally I was like, "Oh, this will be nice." And then we got there and it was like, I guess like I'll just eat this food now.
Yeah.
And I think some of it is we talked through this a few weeks ago on the pod, but some of it is that I've like kind of reduced a lot of the palatability of my food. So
Right.
it's like it really is just like I had a bagel, which are great. We love bagels, but they don't like really taste like a whole lot. And like sticky rice with dinner and a little bit of Rice Krispies on my oatmeal. Like that's
Mhm.
that's kind of it. Um,
Okay.
so it feels good to eat more food, but it just hasn't been this like, oh my gosh, I just can't wait to like eat this or something. So that's been interesting.
I think in an instance like that, that's by far the best way to manage it, though. It's,
Hmm.
I think that if you're really feeding into like I'm gonna save up for all of this like
Yeah.
whatever, I don't know, I'm gonna go out for Italian or something with my refeed, which
Yeah.
would be a little bit hard to make work regardless. Like it is just so much harder to feel satiated. And also I feel like it just when you build it up to be such an event, like, oh, this is
Yes.
so much, I'm so excited for it. I think that's where it's really easy to get into trouble.
I think so. And also like hunger is usually higher afterwards.
Hmm.
So like the next day when you go back
Yeah.
down, you're usually pretty hungry. And so it's like if you've kind of macro Tetrised all these like really fun foods in, you're just gonna want them more. Like, and that'll be more frustrating.
Yeah.
So I've also kind of been like using this opportunity because like this early in prep is like the healthy part where we're not pushing to extreme measures, right? So
Yeah.
I've been really intentional like with my high days and my low days of like food cycling and like rotating my foods, not in a like way that I'm gonna get sloppy and make mistakes, but just in terms of like, oh, on my high day, like I'm gonna have like some pineapple, like some higher glycemic carbs, for
Right.
example. And so like I'm getting in, I'm trying to like stockpile as many micronutrients and as diverse a palette as I can, like
Okay.
for my gut, for digestion, but for like internal health as well, because obviously on the back end of this prep, when you turn that corner of like, okay, this is no longer healthy, and we're really depriving the body. I'm really just like thinking ahead, and it's been going well. So
Doesn't sound like you're suffering
no,
yet though.
yet.
Okay. How much are you down so far?
So about 8 pounds in 4 weeks,
Okay.
and we're on track probably this week for another two. So probably like 10. I'm expecting to hit a low tomorrow. I've got three more. I've got Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday weigh-ins. Sunday
Okay.
will be a high day, so I'm
Okay.
expecting like at least two new lows in the next 3 days.
Yeah,
Um,
damn, you guys are losing at a good clip. So you're like over 5% of your body weight down already.
yeah.
Nice. Okay. Anything else on your end?
No, I feel like that was a lot longer than I intended, but
No, that was good.
it's been on my
I
mind. But yeah, I'm just really trying hard to enjoy this part because I think what I have it's like everyone, I want to get to that part where it gets gnarly.
yeah.
Where like you're just seeing like weird veins pop and like, I did get a forehead vein though.
Hell
But
yeah.
just want to see some like gnarly shreds and be like, yeah, this looks sick.
You
But
just have the most vascular forehead.
yeah, I want a Harry Potter vein, like a scar. Um, but I'm just trying to be mindful that like, yo, just like it'll happen and enjoy because it's honestly not that hard right now. So just enjoy the fact that it's not hard because when it gets hard, you'll be like, man, remember when I felt so much better?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It seems like you're doing a really good job enjoying it though. Just being present with it as well.
yeah, it's made me like really efficient with my time. We've already chatted through that, but just, locked into my routine, which I enjoy. So
Hmm.
that feels just really good.
Yeah, there's for sure always like a kind of new energy that comes with fat loss, I feel like, because it does force you to be in such a routine. And same way for me, it like makes me feel so good that like I get it. Okay. On my end, I don't really feel like anything is different. I've just been doing the same thing last couple of weeks. I honestly don't feel like I have any really good personal updates. I've basically just been doing the same thing with my training and nutrition. We're progressing
Sounds good.
along. Yeah, my sleep has been off the last couple of weeks a little bit. So progression has been a little bit slower, but I am still feeling quite good.
Not being small, keeping you up at night.
Yeah, I keep having nightmares that I'm just a tiny person and then I wake up and just the nightmare never ends.
Horrible.
Um, yes, so that is basically where I'm living, and I don't necessarily want to expand on it more. No, honestly, I feel like everything is kind of more or less just stayed the same the last couple of weeks. I don't really have a lot to report there. Let's get
Have
into the
you guys,
episode.
are you doing any untracked meals? Like,
Well, yeah, we're doing one.
okay.
I will say, similar to what you were talking about, I feel like at the start I was making it way more of an event, and I have just gotten back to just like I'm just gonna have like a steak and like some. I think my last one was like a steak and like some sweet potato. Not that I like don't want to ever have like other foods again or anything of the sort. But my hunger's still been pretty high, and what I was finding like when I would have like we're gonna like have a bunch of pizza, for example, then it's like, okay, the next day it is so much harder for me to like stay on point. And I've found just like keeping those simpler and like less calorie dense has been quite helpful as well. Similar to what you were saying, and just less hyper palatable. But yeah, we have one a week right now. We have those 2 high days a week. We have 2 low days, 3 kind of moderate days. And yeah, so been trying to keep that pretty simple.
Nice.
Yeah. Cool. All right, you ready to get into the episode? Okay, so again, we're working through how to kind of create the synergy between your training and your nutrition in a fat loss phase. So, nutrition, that's our stimulus for fat loss. So, the goal here is to get leaner. Manipulating our nutrition is how we go about that. Our training, important to understand, is the stimulus for muscle growth or at least maintenance. And as I mentioned, most people make the mistake of underestimating how interrelated these are. So, if we want the best fat loss and the best muscle growth, we need to be looking at how both of these work in concert. Now, fat loss, and really as a whole, creating our best body composition is really tied to our ability to manage stressors and still recover from them. We talk about this a lot, women especially. It's going to be very important to, because your body is very adaptive, right? Your body's an adaptation machine. And if it senses like, hey, there's so much stress coming in, or we're pushing into like dangerously low body fats, we're pushing below our essential levels of body fat, which will be higher for women than men. Body will adapt because it's very good at survival and slow things like our rate of loss, or hey, it doesn't make sense for us to build muscle right now. Like we don't have enough food to recover from all the stress that's being applied to us. Why would we actually build muscle tissue, right? So we need to actually be able to recover from these things. And that is where we have to understand that training and dieting, those are both stressors. And as I said, there's a certain point where more stress is detrimental. So we could do way too much training to recover from, which again adds to the total stress load our body has to recover from. And that could downstream impact our ability to lose body fat because again, it's sensing, hey, just this amount of stress we have coming in, we don't have the food to recover from it. Like it doesn't make sense for us to get leaner and like sap more of these energy stores. So let's slow that down as much as we can. Or if we're looking at the nutrition side of things, if we're not eating enough food, not eating enough carbs, that will hurt our ability to train hard, our ability to recover. If our training sucks, we're not recovering well, we lose muscle, right? So they're very much interrelated. Basically, your macros, training volume, intensity, exercise selection, and your cardio, it's an ecosystem of things that impact how good the result is at the end of the phase. Anything else you would add there?
I like the term ecosystem when describing all of that.
It's like a whole little ant farm.
It is. It's like a snow globe, um, with a gym inside. But I think the only thing I would add is that I think people, when people get really excited about fat loss, and rightfully so, like it's cool to see those changes. It's like really fun. But I do think they undervalue the training aspect of things. And that's where, I do want to remind everyone that like with fat loss, it's like the distinction between fat loss and weight loss, right? So yes, we should be seeing the scale trend down over time, of course. However, like, and this depends on how lean we're looking to get necessarily, but there kind of comes a point with like clients who are getting ready for photo shoots, for example, where this what we're talking about today makes a really big impact in terms of the look that you bring,
Yep.
because there's kind of a corner that you turn when it gets from like fat loss and like driving fat loss, and then kind of like the stress management side takes over,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes much more about recovery. And what we're ultimately trying to do is get you to arrive at your best look. So we're not necessarily, the goal isn't really to get you to arrive at the number you want to see on scale, or like that weight that you were in high school, or something like that. I mean, some of those things are like correlative bits of information. Like, hey, I know like roughly I looked like this at this weight, but maybe we also had a different amount of muscle back then. So long story short, yes, we do want to see that scale trending down over time, but the training side of things is so, so, so important, because this is how we're going to have shape to that fat loss. We don't really just want to look like flat and skinny.
100%. And yes, the recovery side of things is so underrated too. Like
But
I
that's
think
exactly where this conversation is going to get to, and like why this
absolutely,
subject is so important to talk about.
absolutely, because it's easy to, especially with like the type of clients we typically attract, very type A, gotten a lot done by like just pushing harder, 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 doing more and doing more, right? Where your body it can be frustrating, and I this is for like probably my biggest challenge as well. I think
Same.
this is something you manage quite well, but so yeah, same for you. I would say like we're probably both better at the pushing than the recovery, right? Like doing more, taking calories lower, that's not a problem.
Yeah,
Actually
I think
recovering and go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm like interrupting all day today.
You're
It's really
very
bad
self-conscious about your interrupting today.
because it's a bad habit. But I think we do have a lot of clients who like I was just journaling about this, and I was just like, my one of my superpowers is the ability to disassociate, and like in fat loss, like that is a superpower.
Mhm.
Where it's just like whatever, put the blinders on and rip it, and I think there is a certain like high, or dopamine hit that comes from
Oh
that
yeah.
to do that, like
Oh
head
yeah.
down and grind mentality. And a lot of our clients are very good at doing that. And it really is helpful. But again, that kind of like juncture or that fork in the road, where it's like we've accomplished that first bit of fat loss and then we're rounding that corner into where like, all right, now we might need to pull back because we need to manage recovery a little bit better. That's where this is not helpful. And yes, where I've already like talked to my coaches and I'm like, just so we know in this prep, this will be my problem. And you will have to save me from myself, basically. And that's where that training manipulation comes in.
That's a really good insight though, dude, because I think most people listening to this have probably experienced that. The first half of your fat loss phase goes well, and then you just hit a wall, especially like female clientele. I say for
Yes.
men, it's not as much of an issue, but especially for women, where if you aren't good at prioritizing the recovery side of things, if we're consistently sleeping like 5.5 hours per night, um, if we're like skipping our higher food days that we have programmed, we will hit a wall and we will stall out. Now, to speak too quickly, we kind of already touched on this, but like why training? Your training. We're gonna talk through training changes, but the basic principles of your training shouldn't drastically change when we enter a fat loss phase. I think that is important. We don't want to like. I'm gonna do a lot of high reps to just focus on like burning in the cuts or burning a lot of calories or anything of the sort. Like we don't want to completely. Or I'm just gonna do circuits now. What built muscle allows us to maintain muscle. So we still need to send that same signal. We still need to be challenged, lifting like heavy, challenging loads. Like the basic principles of your training should not change, because it is so important to have a good physique. Again, if you want to build shape, you don't just want to get skinny at the end of the phase. We need plenty of muscle. So our training should be geared towards how can we best maintain training performance as we get leaner, right? If our training starts to suck, our ability to recover starts to suck, again, it will probably downstream tell us like, hey, this like ratio of stress applied versus recovery from a fat loss perspective as well as getting like out of our ideal range. Now, sometimes we just have to dig and that's how it's going to be, but it's a good indicator there. But again, we really want to maintain our training as much as possible. So I guess before we talk through some considerations here, anything else you want to add? Cool. Feel free to just jump in here whenever. Uh, First, we need to look at how aggressively are we dieting slash how much food are we eating, which very much go hand in hand. At the start of a fat loss phase, I just shared about this the other day. For the right person, important distinction, for the right person, we can diet relatively aggressively at the start, maybe even losing quicker than like 1% of body weight per week. But in general, quicker isn't going to be better when it comes to changing your body composition, which I think is a very important thing to keep in mind. Maybe we can squeeze out like 3, 4 weeks where we're dieting pretty aggressively. Like I talked, you've lost quite quickly here. You're not going to continue to lose 2 to 3 pounds every week, I would imagine. I talked about the same thing at the start of my fat loss phase. Like I lost 16 pounds in the first 4 weeks, and I think the last 12 weeks, 11 weeks, I think I lost like 7 or 8 pounds.
Pretty good considering what you
Yeah, but
did. front.
but considerably slower, right? And that's the thing is, though, after that first 3 or 4 weeks of losing quickly, we will really start to see training performance tank, our ability to recover tank. Biofeedback is worse. And if we just keep pushing for the quickest rate of loss, we will put ourselves in a position where we're much more likely to lose muscle and again get these other negative adaptations we talked through. So after that, I would say realistically, maybe losing around like 0.3 to 0.8% of body weight per week. I honestly don't even want to be too attached to a specific number there. Like how are our progress pictures changing? How are our body measurements changing? As a whole, that's much more important to me. But in general, again, I'm not opposed to ripping off the band-aid and getting some quick fat loss done initially. And we don't want things to be going so slow that we're like spending our life, the rest of our life in fat loss. But in general, more food will equal a better training, recovery, and thus physique outcome. We've talked about this a lot lately. This is where really pulling like the cardio lever more. Hey, we're taking this move more, eat more approach where maybe we are doing more cardio, but this also allows us to eat a lot more food, especially for lean people trying to get leaner where, hey, and especially if you have a lot of muscle, the more carbs we can take in to support hard training, our ability to recover, replenish glycogen, the better the outcome we get will be. So I really do like that approach in this instance. Anything else you would add there?
Yeah, it really, and this ties in really to I think the post that you referenced and just made, but it also does really depend on like where food is when we start. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like in terms of like how big a pull we want to make. Now food and calories are relative, right? So like for example, you are like what, 7 feet tall, and I'm
Yeah,
4'11", right?
correct.
Um,
410. I think it's 410, but
but I mean, like it's all relative. You know what I mean? So like making a big pull off of your food to me is still going to be like, wow, he gets to eat so much food, but it's all relative.
yeah,
But having said that, we do have to take certain things into account. Like, if you know, if your maintenance is like 16, 1700 calories, I might go about things a little, I might want to pull that cardio lever a little bit more because again, like it just really depends. I don't want to get into like a case study or something, but it like this ties into like, okay, well, how much, fiber and micronutrients is this person going to be able to take in? And like, so anyways, just, I guess that's just nuanced considerations for,
no, that's a very good point though, because this typically, I think when that aggressive, like we can have that aggressive start is typically like I've been working with someone for a very long time. We've gone through an entire building phase. Maybe the
yeah,
calories are worked up quite high. But even then, yeah, if it's like, dude, we're maintaining at like 1700 calories and you're just a tiny person, I don't want to pull you to 800 for, you know
right
what I
off the
mean?
bat, right? Like,
Correct.
where are we gonna go?
Yes,
So I think that's an important consideration for people listening.
very much so. Another important consideration is carb intake, especially if you have a lot of muscle and you are training hard. Now, on the flip side here, I don't want to like install a fragile mindset. The reality is a lot of people don't have as much muscle as they think. Natalie, just kidding. You have a lot of muscle. You genuinely have a lot of muscle. But the more muscle you have and the leaner you are, the more important plenty of carbs around your training is. Especially exogenous carbs help preserve our muscle glycogen. And if our muscle glycogen gets too low, this does hurt our ability to produce force and thus get a good training stimulus. Now, again, I don't want to instill like a fragility mindset. If you're not someone who's built a lot of muscle yet, I think it can be easy to get into like, oh my gosh, I haven't had 100 grams of carbs pre-workout. My training is going to suck. And it will if you tell yourself it's going to, where that's probably not the case. I don't want to like overplay that. But on the flip side, if you are someone who has a lot of muscle, things like your pre-workout carbohydrate, your intra-workout carbohydrate intake do make a pretty big difference in our training quality. And peri-workout nutrition really ties into that. Are we getting plenty of carbohydrates in before the session? Are we well hydrated? And also, have we replenished our glycogen after the training session, which will lead to good performance in the next session, right? If we're keeping carbohydrate intake too low for too long, and again, there's like caveats to all of this, right? Where like when a client, like that, when we were talking about like that aggressive start, there's times where like someone might be super low carb for like 2 weeks, and I'm just really digging them hard. Or like we talked about, like using a higher fat, lower carb approach in specific cases to like improve metabolic flexibility, where we're okay, right? We probably don't have a ton of muscle yet in that case, but like this is very context specific. Um, but again, lean person, good amount of muscle already. Your carbohydrate intake before and during the session, especially going to be important. That will also kind of play into like replenishing afterwards. Um, but intra workout carbs, similar point to before. I do, especially, and I know we've talked through like for a lot of more advanced clients who do need intra workout carbs. Uh, a lot of times we will just have people not track those because we don't want to remove that. I don't think it's going to be stored as fat. It's really just going to help benefit our training. And again, that point I just made about if our glycogen stores get too low, it hurts our ability to produce force. Us having like these very quick digesting, very quick acting carbs in the session is really going to be quite helpful for preserving training quality and making sure that doesn't happen. Now, again, I think it's easy to take these things. Like if we're at maintenance, you're in your first like 2 weeks of coaching, we're at maintenance, we're still like figuring out how to train hard. Do we need to be worried about this? No, probably not. It's not going to make or break your progress by any means. But again, as we get more advanced, it does become more and more important. Anything to add there?
Um, Worth mentioning, I like the fragility mindset here. But if you decide that your training is going to be impacted, it will be. So mindset is just really important. You have to just kind of proceed like nothing's changed. Um, you just have to. I see it all the time when, there's a lot of fear around pulling food, which we know is the driver of fat loss, so it's
Mm-hmm.
necessary for the goal. Um, the fear right off the bat of like, oh my God, leg day. Like, how am I going to do leg day on like lower carbs, And it's just like you will be fine. You'll be
Yeah.
fine. Like honestly, like this depends on like how lean we already are, how aggressive the calorie pull is or was, and how far we're looking to take this. So most people are not looking to step on stage for a bodybuilding show, is the
Right.
reality.
Right.
And even like photo shoot prep clients, you know, they're gonna dig a little towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
But I would honestly like the majority of your fat loss, and of course I do understand that everyone perceives hunger differently. So there's real hunger, there's perceived hunger, but they're both very real. Um, so I would add nuance there. But we have to just go forth with the mindset that it's just not a problem, and like training is just going to be absolutely fine. And one of the reasons I do really like an intra workout here, like some EAAs and maybe like a little bit of coconut water or something of the sort, is I find it does help people mentally as well.
Oh
You're
yeah.
like literally taking something in as you're training. And so that kind of mental thought of like, I'm ingesting something and this is going to help, I think can be helpful. But I don't want to get into that because I know we're really trying to talk about training, but we can't not talk about that because the point that we're trying to make here is preserving the training stimulus at all costs, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and it is quite helpful. Some of it is for sure a psychological benefit, but it is definitely helpful. As a whole, doing more calorie cycling can also be helpful. Now, actually not too married. And again, at the start, we're probably just digging, but as we get deeper, you get leaner. Like you said, you're doing more calorie cycling now. How many high days a week do you have currently?
I'm doing 4 consecutive low days.
Oh,
So
fun.
sometimes, yeah, so sometimes actually it's cool because I'm like, I know we can drive it for 4 days,
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna see a low.
Yeah, for sure.
But so it depends on like the way that it cycles. So it'll either be one a week or two,
Okay. Okay.
depending
Fair
on how it
enough.
falls.
Yeah. Okay. And as you get deeper into the fat loss phase, what you guys will probably do is add more high days to make sure we're preserving training quality, prevent other adaptations. But that is an approach we can use. It can be quite helpful. Now, really kind of refeeds fall into that camp as well. Refeeds, just calorie cycling with like training day, rest day, or maybe it would just be like, hey, maybe we're doing like 2 refeeds back to back in the middle of the week. There's a lot of different ways we could set this up. Andrew and I recorded a podcast on refeeds a while back. I will link that up in the show notes as far as like different ways we could apply that and kind of thought process behind adding those in because I feel like there's a whole topic in itself. But as we get deeper into the fat loss phase, we get quite lean. and we're really working to maintain training performance, those periods of time where we might be bringing food back up to maintenance or even a little bit higher with a lot of carbs specifically can be quite helpful for maintaining our training performance. Your training volume and intensity are huge variables here. Basically, lower calories means we have less recovery capacity typically. So we're looking at volume being, hey, this is the number of hard sets we're doing per week. And a deficit is not going to be the time for us to like ramp our volume way up typically. Again, depending on where we're coming from. If you're brand new, you might be, if you weren't training, of course, we're ramping your volume up. But it's for a little bit more experienced person who's already been doing things well for a while, not going to be the time we want to like ramp our volume way up. Again, we can only grow from what we can recover from. If we can't recover from the stress and fatigue that we're applying, we'll actually regress a bit. So we want to make sure that we are maintaining that balance as well we can. Now, to signal the need to maintain and build muscle, I typically would prefer, like with clients, I'm almost always going to prefer intensity over more volume. So I would rather, like, if we're in a fat loss phase, I would rather have you give me just one really good hard set over 3 sets that are just like kind of mediocre. Now, I don't always even see like a need, especially if we're like newer to this, like a lot of newer clientele, if we haven't built a good amount of muscle already, we don't really need to pull volume back in a fat loss phase. I don't find often, unless it's like, hey, we're just getting way better at training, we're better at applying a stimulus now. But for more advanced clients especially, I do sometimes see we need to decrease volume a bit as the phase goes on. We'll see things like, okay, suddenly their perceived energy in the training, they're just feeling smashed after the training, the recovery isn't as good, progression is suddenly stalling or regressing a bit. Even things like the physique is looking a little bit flatter, soreness is dragging out a little bit longer, which tells us, okay, we're having trouble recovering in like whatever area. And thus they're not, excuse me, they're not storing glycogen there as well. But basically, it's interesting to see like, oh, cool. Well, let's pull like, okay, our hamstrings are staying quite sore. Okay, let's pull back one set of your RDLs maybe. And next week, wow, I felt so good in my training again. And suddenly we're progressing again. It is really cool to see like how quickly manipulating those variables can make a difference. Anything else you would add there?
Yeah, I will interject here and say that, behind door number three, like the third lever that we can pull here is my go-to first is probably going to be like pulling cardio or like even just like do take an extra rest day from cardio because
Mm-hmm.
again, the priority is preserving the training stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're not in a position case dependent always, of course. If we're not in a position to issue another refeed, um, don't forget that cardio is essentially a calorie manipulation, right?
Right.
Because we're pulling activity back. So this is a lever that we can pull in that, and I think, where we are in our timeline here is, we're pretty much talking about rounding that corner from
Yeah.
like digging to like fatigue management.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that might be something that I would do before I immediately pull training volume, like pull sets off of things.
I like
Um,
that.
it depends, right?
Yeah.
It depends on like how the body responds, like what the physique looks like. But that we or some combination thereof. Perhaps an added like recovery day where it's like we're not missing sessions, but maybe we just have an extra rest day and then we're gonna go hit it. And if we feel that we're kind of recovered enough to do so.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times in the instance, my first move would be, as you said, maybe we're like pulling back cardio, pulling back movement, maybe adding an extra refeed. And then if I'm seeing, okay, this is a consistent thing where let's say we deloaded and then 3 weeks later, the person like suddenly we're already seeing it seems like they need another deload.
Like
Okay,
numbers.
then our volume is right. Then our volume is the issue and maybe we pull back there. But yeah, you're right. It's probably not the first lever I would pull.
Yeah. But I think we should point out that like signs that we're looking here that like volume does need to be addressed are like, yeah, we're needing deloads like weirdly frequently. Like,
Hmm.
hey, we just deloaded. Numbers are dropping, in the logbook. Like we're just there might be a point, again for this lean person getting leaner, there might be a point where you're kind of just like maintaining, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But then we kind of just start to see drops across the board.
Mhm.
And we've talked through this before, but like, we always tend to see those push movements drop first.
Always, yeah.
But it's like everything else kind of like hangs on a little bit, but then it's like, oh, I'm okay with some of that. It's like, all right, like we're still feeling pretty good. Everything else is kind of maintaining, but then we kind of it starts creeping into some other movements, and like once pull starts to go, sometimes it's a little bit like,
That's the line. That's
yeah,
the
that's where
line.
we like, absolutely not. We got to do something, drastic measures. But yeah, like that's where I might start looking at that volume manipulation. And it might not necessarily be a shotgun approach. I don't think anything really ever needs to be a shotgun approach.
No.
It's not like I'm just gonna rip off like one set off of everything. I mean, sometimes it's like, okay, cool. Like so some of our more fatiguing movements, I'm going to like take down a set. Or
Yeah.
something. And I guess we also should have mentioned that probably by this point, like some intensifiers have come out.
Hmm.
So if you had things like myo reps or like rest pause, like any,
Triple drop set on pendulum squats.
yes, for real. So some of those probably have already been pulled by the time you're getting to this point.
Yeah.
I'd say like phase one, phase two, is probably what we're talking through now is where it's like, oh, okay, like now we do need to start looking at like some volume adjustments, like to your set.
Yeah. But you're right. Like it's never just a shotgun. Like, hey, we're pulling back X number of sets. I'm asking like, hey, specific days where we're most fatigued,
Yeah,
any specific muscle groups that are having trouble recovering, and then I like to look at the specific movements that you're feeling are most fatiguing, and then like go into the logbook and look. Are we seeing like, okay, set one they did 100 for 10, set two they did 100 for four? There's like a huge drop off from like one set to the next. Okay, like that might be one where yes, they're getting a lot of fatigue here, and it would make sense for us to pull. There's a lot of caveats there as well, but that's kind of my starting point.
it's also helpful.
Um,
It's helpful for us. Like we like actually look at our clients' logbooks, and it's
mhm,
helpful because a lot of times, if you're, even if you're like you're a coach, and even if you're like asking the quote right questions,
right.
I know all the time, like, we always ask our clients every week, like, hey, any movements you're struggling to progress? And, I think most people always come back with like, yes, this, and then I'll go back and look at the logbook and I'm like, bro, your second set went up from last week. Like, and it's like, no, you're good. Like your top set or your top set was the same. Your back off actually increased. We're fine. Like you did make an improvement. Like, yeah, just one rep of one set, but like that's not trouble progressing.
That
So
is
yeah,
a
check
question.
on it.
I have thought about this lately. I want to change the phrasing on that question because I've had a lot of instances of that too, where it's like, wait, but we added 2 reps and 10 pounds this week. And I think that what I've chatted through with clients is I want you to understand I'm not asking, did it feel hard to do this? Like, I think
Right.
that's, like it was hard to progress. I progressed, but it was hard. But are we having trouble adding, like actually doing more than we did last time? Um, okay.
Or like
Exercise.
a lateral raise, and it's like, well, yeah.
That comes up a lot too. Yeah, that's just life. That's the lateral life. Exercise selection. Here, we talked about this before as well, but typically don't want to completely overhaul your training at the start of the diet. Really, it is quite helpful for us to know, are we maintaining tissue or even continue to improve, that we are able to maintain strength or ideally progress strength on these same movements. If we like plug in a lot of brand new movements, the first like 4 or 6 weeks, we will make a lot of neural gains where yes, we're getting better at the skill of the movement, but it's hard for us to know like, are we actually building muscle there? Are we actually maintaining? And we just don't have as good of a litmus test. So I do like to have like our logbook now versus prior to us starting the fat loss phase to compare to. As far as when and why we might swap out a movement in a fat loss phase, what are your thoughts there? Would you ever?
Yes, I absolutely would. And that is the biggest one for me is again, this depends on like the client. How lean are we looking to get and how hard are we pushing? Because the leaner that someone gets, your leverages do change. So the way that your joints move in space, right? Your
Hmm.
proprioception and whatnot, like all of that kind of is affected by like how lean, like are you getting shredded and peeled, right? Because then like certain machines just are going to feel completely different and they're not going
Right.
to hit you as well. So this is more applicable, I think, to the clients who have like a really sick kit at their gym, you know? Because I know a lot of our clients, like if you're at Planet Fitness or like, Anytime Fitness or something like that, like we're probably utilizing a lot of like dumbbells, in which case like dumbbells are cool because they can adapt to those leverages, as
Yeah.
those and change. But if we're someone who's like an equipment nerd, I mean, honestly, the gym that I go to, I scant dumbbells at this point, like use a ton of machines. So I'm actually like really nerdily looking forward to like some of the adjustments that I will have to make there. Cables are great too, but this is a consideration as well, like when starting someone in fat loss, like depending on the access to equipment and gym that they have, like you could like thinking coach could kind of like look ahead and be like, okay, like maybe we do want to like make sure there's a good amount of like dumbbell movements in there and cable movements to ensure a little bit more of a seamless transition there. I'm not saying it's necessary. I'm just saying that's something you could mess with, and think
Yeah.
about at the time. Um, but yeah, like I said, I think this is kind of case specific for like if you have a super cool gym with like lots of toys that you're playing with. But the body will move differently through space as you continue to lose body fats. And I think particularly with those like push movements in particular, probably like some lower body stuff as well, potentially. I could see like, even the way you would set up like a Smith, like rear foot elevated split squat or something, I think would feel quite different, like as yeah, just like as you're moving your body differently.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that we necessarily have to change those out, but we would want to stay on top of things with form review because there might be some different cues we in terms of like, hey, well, like we like I know I've talked through this before, but like even as my body's continued to change like through a building phase, like how I set up my pulling movements has had to change as like, my lats have gotten bigger and we have to
Right.
like accommodate that a little bit more. I have to go back in the other direction on the fat loss side of things, shift over again. But anyways, so that and I think you can make some of those manipulations and different cues, and then if that's not working, then I would look to swap out. Um, I would I would say that is really like why I would swap those movements out. I
Yeah.
can't think of maybe I'm drawing a blank. Am I missing something? Is there another reason that you would change movements?
Not for most people. I mean, a
Yeah.
fatigue from a fatigue management perspective, like if whatever movement is super fatiguing, but honestly, I don't think that's I think we address that with the volume side of things to the level that most like I think if we're looking at like somebody like you could listen to a podcast about prep and someone talk about how like I'm gonna swap my dumbbell press for like a more stable press because I like don't like the ability my ability to stabilize like the whole as a whole like the amount of energy it takes to do this is more fatiguing, but I don't think that's applicable even to someone like getting photo shoot lean honestly. Um,
I had another thought just now that popped into mind that all of a sudden I'm forgetting. I guess I was gonna say, like, I guess you could add like a caveat or a note for the client who's training like on a home setup, and maybe they're utilizing something like a barbell back squat and
yeah.
like a conventional deadlift, or like
Hmm.
lots of RDLs or something, all that axial loading that wouldn't be my first choice for most people
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah.
But if we are dealing with a limited setup and that's what we have, that would be a consideration.
Yeah, and I feel like in the past that's when I would have like tried to swap those out, whereas now I would probably just reduce the volume a lot
Yeah,
more often.
I agree.
Cool. Rep ranges. First, again, I think there's a general thought that higher rep ranges are better for fat loss because we burn more calories, which again isn't the goal with our training. If we're focusing on burning calories, we're not focusing on building or maintaining muscle, which is the key here. Uh, The rep ranges is honestly pretty nuanced. I, as a whole, don't think rep ranges should change a tremendous amount when we're dieting outside of like what we would normally do. I think we could argue like, hey, us doing a set of like 5 to 8 could yield the same muscle building stimulus as a set of like 10 to 15, but the lower rep set would be less fatiguing. We burn less glycogen. So we should be able to train better in the following sets. Recovery will be better. We'll build more muscle. But I like Again, are most people training hard enough for that to be a big issue or get lean enough to where that's a big consideration? Not necessarily. And on the flip side, us like training in the lower rep range isn't the best if we're like just trying to dial in somebody's ability to execute a movement well. So I don't personally find, I will say like I have a couple more advanced clients who have gotten quite deep into fat loss, and as of late I have pulled back like, okay, we're gonna pull back your rep range on the split squat from like 8 to 12 to like 5 to 7 or 5 to 8, for example. And that will psychologically and truly, that'll just be a good bit less draining, right? Especially on those more fatiguing movements. I do really like that tool to be able to do, like, it just makes the movement a lot less fatiguing. Um, so maybe we bias like more 5 to 8, 5 to 10 with like the most fatiguing compounds, especially. But again, like if it's someone who doesn't execute well yet, us increasing the loading, I find like working with, I just don't find that typically helps us improve the execution. And also rep ranges should be movement dependent. Like a lot of our more short overload movements, more short bias movements just aren't well suited for lower rep ranges. Like a dumbbell lateral raise, if I give you like a set of 5 or 6, typically people are just going to use a lot of momentum to get the weight up and then aren't actually going to be working the tissue very much in the short position where we want it to be working the most. So it's very context dependent, and I don't know if I actually provide anything of value there. You have any thoughts on rep ranges?
No, you did because you did touch on a nuance, which I think is important. And that's the psychological fatigue of a higher rep range for certain movements. I mean, I agree with you. Like take a split squat, for example. Like, okay, so as opposed to doing like 10 to 15 reps per side, like any unilateral movements, especially too, right? So like 10 to 15 reps of a split squat, and then I gotta like turn it around and do it on the other side. Like, fuck me, like I don't want to do that ever. So I could, I see a use case for sure for like if your reps were set there, moving it down to like 7 to 10, and then it's like
Yeah,
we're still getting those effective reps, but psychologically it's so much less daunting, especially like as you do get to the end of like your grindy fat loss phase, where getting to the gym even feels like an effort sometimes, and it's like, okay, I literally just have to do this 7 times on each leg. Like I can do that, I think that's
100%.
an important thing to touch on because we are human and psychology plays into like everything that we do in terms of our training and nutrition. Um, so I think that's you brought that up, but I thought it did bear a little bit of expansion. But then simultaneously I also find like, there are some movements I just really like in that higher rep range.
For
Like
sure.
personally, like rear delts for me, like it's hard. Like I just find I always get a really good stimulus like around like that, like 12, 10 to 15,
Hmm. Yeah.
depending on your cable stack too, because that'll play into it if you're doing cables. But some move like, I imagine some clients like kind of sitting there like bored out of their minds counting to 15. And so though that might be a very like effective rep range, for particular movements, I think that's a consideration as well as kind of like attention span and like how much work are we actually getting done.
Anything else you would add here before we wrap this up?
No, I think we went in like a million different directions, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a fun chat. Not our most organized, but I hope it was helpful. Just some fun things to consider and important things to consider. Um, and this is just an example of the detail we go into with coaching. Just fun to nerd out over, honestly. So if you would like to work with our team, hit the link in the show notes. If you enjoy the show, do us a huge favor, leave us a 5-star rating and review. Just helps us reach more people, helps us continue to grow the podcast. And we will catch you guys next time.